So how did you first start to look at this topic of cultural intelligence?
Whoever knows the first moment in anything, but you can't fail but to notice, north, south, east, west, developing, there's an inability to talk or to get really below a sort of level of politeness that's sort of over-defined. I remember talking to you, I met this young man who was doing some work in China for the first time, and he'd been on some sort of cultural something or other course, and they taught him about how he should hand his business card over to people in China. And he'd been on this course and been told that what you had to do was avoid eye contact and hand over with two hands. And unfortunately, as soon as he landed, the first person he met was somebody from China who had also been on a cultural course and had been told that absolutely when he met somebody from the Western world, you had to make sure you kept eye contact. And they almost knocked each other out when they met.
Yeah.
And, this sense of that as parts of the world come together, all you have to do is learn a load of rules as to how many hands you use when you hand over a card is completely ridiculous. But also, as somebody who runs an NGO, I continue to see just so often, the voluntary sector or the NGO sector, assuming that all of you are complete rats, doing it for extremely dodgy reasons. People from the private sector assuming that people like me are completely incompetent, can't add two and two together and wear sandals. And yet we've got to get sectors to work more cleverly together because there are very few problems that don't require. I remember doing some work with Tata a few years ago, and they were trying to explain to me that there was a generation that went through and was developed within Tata who were taught how to operate within Tata, that huge company in India. And that's pretty well what they knew and how they interfaced with the Indian government. But now if you look at most of the problems they were facing, they were interfacing with all the government agencies and actually this thing called civil society, which they had no real understanding. And civil society was preventing them occasionally from doing the right business decisions. So you see an inability of the sectors to work together. And I think that's cultural intelligence, whether it's about sectors or geographies, or also, if I'm really honest, about generations. I would love to add to the competencies of most senior leaders, can you inspire young people? And I would love to add to the competencies of young people, can you, and particularly some young people from cultures where you're brought up to have huge respect for your elders, to the extent that you don't actually ask the difficult question when you know that they're not necessarily right. So, whether it's an intergenerational, geographical or cross-sector, it seems to me it's all about cultural intelligence, coping with people who are not like you.
So what is cultural intelligence?
Cultural intelligence to me is the ability to cross boundaries of any sort. And not just to cross them and survive or cross them and succeed, but actually to cross them and thrive. So not just to be able to operate in a common purpose culture or a female culture or an NGO culture or a BP culture, but actually to be able to cross all the different worlds. My father used to talk about the flying dead. He used to say that the world would be run by the flying dead. People like me, you fly into Melbourne and then fly on to Singapore and then fly on, and very often have no idea what's going on with everything. And you can talk about the flying dead in lots of different ways. People who fly across the world, terrifying, but you get flying dead who cross their city and have no more idea what's happening on the other side of their city from their own, or, as you know, and I will be eternally grateful for BP for all the work we do with young university students, but you get students who travel abroad, they cross the world and become the flying dead. The first thing they do when they arrive in a new city, surrounded by masses and masses of cultures, masses of students from all over the world, all convening on a city that's full of cultural intelligence, the first thing they do is find other people like them and stay in their dormitories. So this extraordinary moment of cultural intelligence is lost. So The flying dead is the sort of opposite of cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence is people who can cross boundaries and work with people who aren't like them and thrive in so doing.
So we'll delve into that a little bit further in a minute, but in your book you introduce this notion of CQ, cultural quotient, and you relate that to IQ and EQ, which we've heard about, especially for the past 5 or 10 years, as the new thing that we're looking for in our leaders. So what is CQ? How is it different from IQ and EQ? And what's the next Q?
There are many Qs, I have no doubt at all. There's a long list of them, and they're queuing up. But certainly, I mean, IQ, we all know what IQ is. It's hugely satisfying because you can test for it. So it probably exists because it has a KPI.
Right.
And on the whole, we all want IQ because, if nothing else, it helps you to be able to rapidly take in information, process it, and understand it. It's what we all have to develop, and we're persuaded that exams test it, and they do it very well. I mean, I always laugh at the amount of us who all have. Remember when your baby was about sort of 6 months old, you started telling everybody this was the child with the highest IQ in the world, evidenced by absolutely nothing, some silly thing that they'd done. But IQ is what we all aspired to. But if I had a penny for all the people who say to me, if you could just take the people out of this problem, there wouldn't be a problem. And you sit there thinking, what a jerk. I mean, how could you possibly do such a silly thing? And then, as you say, EQ came along, and it was a relief because it was recognising that leadership was probably not just IQ, it was something more, it was something to do with people. That seemed pretty self-evident, but it obviously took us all rather a long time to discover it. It was extraordinarily, in my view, tedious for those women of us who kept on, people sort of cocked their head and say, well, what's the female emotional intelligence approach to this, which irritated me immensely. But we moved on from that. I think that the danger on EQ is you meet people who say, I'm good with people. And that's great, but I think you have to add 2 words after that, which is, am I good with people who aren't like me? And I think you can meet lots of leaders who are extraordinarily good at recruiting people like them and leading them, and I don't think that's enough. In the modern world, you'll miss what's coming from every angle. You'll miss tricks. You'll miss the opportunity to make 2 and 2 and 5 or 6. You won't be able to recruit and, more importantly, retain the unbelievable amount of talent that there is in the world. So I think cultural intelligence was a natural move on. Can you lead people who aren't like you? And not beat the difference out of them. Sometimes you meet people who recruit extraordinary teams of people from all over the world, and within 6 months they've beaten all the difference out of them, and they're all talking the same language. Well, actually, the whole point is that you don't. I was always taught that, innovation comes from well-led discord. You need that discord to come up with new ideas, creativity, see things from different angles.
So if we're comparing to IQ, or in some way comparing an EQ, is there a way we measure CQ, and what would we look for?
I know we had a good go, and there's quite a good test that there is on the ComPurpose website. But if I'm honest, my first boss always used to say, you should run your career from your deathbed backwards, and just remember what you're actually going to be proud of. And I remember him always saying, the things that you are proud of at the end probably won't have had a KPI.
Okay. I know you and I have spoken about this before, cultural intelligence, cultural fluency, as we call it at BP, is something that we find really important in our leaders. And when we say leaders, we talk broadly about basically everyone. Why is cultural intelligence important for leadership? You talked about being able to lead people who are different than themselves, but what does that mean from a business context?
Well, you don't actually need cultural intelligence. If you're going to stick at your own desk and concentrate on a series of facts, and there is a real importance for people to actually occasionally do that. You just need cultural intelligence if you're going to go out into the real world and try and deal with the complex problems. Most I mean, I wanted to be a leader because I wanted to produce change, not to maintain things, but because I wanted to produce change. I wanted to crack big problems. Now, big problems cross boundaries. They squelch, they squelch, they splurge, they cross boundaries constantly. And the trouble is that we then produce leaders who stay within the boundaries. So if you are going to crack a difficult problem, whether that's within BP or whether that's within society, you are going to have to work with partners and stakeholders who are not like you, who have different objectives, different ways of seeing things. And without cultural intelligence, you simply won't be able to do it.